You can never give the best of yourself by accident. Christ is risen. And in this Easter season, we remember a small band of followers that for 50 days, the risen Christ appeared to. And we were those followers, those apostles and disciples that ultimately spread the good news of the resurrected Christ to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. But for those followers and their successors, the ends of the earth was actually the vast expanse of the Roman Empire. An empire that was known as the greatest of all time. An empire that seemed like it was impenetrable and indestructible. But ultimately we know that, just as with all earthly kingdoms, that Rome had a timestamp. Rome was not going to last. And so when we fast forward 400 years, we see in the year 476, the final emperor of Rome being dethroned. And as it's dethroned and Rome collapses, civilization as the world knew it collapsed, culture deteriorated, and it is in that time that a man by the name of Benedict was born. In studying at the epicenter of this collapse of culture and civilization, Benedict found himself observing the world around him and not being satisfied, being disgusted with the ways of paganism, being disgusted with the deterioration of culture. And so what did he decide to do? He actually decided to retreat and to leave and to gather a group of men around him to live a very particular way of life. And it's what Benedict and those men did that actually, some say, saved civilization and culture in Western Europe. It was very simple what he did in his retreat, but he recognized something that we need to recognize today in the midst of what we're experiencing, is that we can never give the best of ourselves by accident. And so what did Benedict do? He created something that we know now as the rule of Saint Benedict. In this simple, small rule, we see this way of life, this ordering of life, to live in such a way that's ordered towards Christ and towards love of him and love of neighbor, and how to live that well and intentionally. And so we see in his rule everything from, when to pray, how to eat, or when it's okay to hit your brother in the community when something goes awry. And so obviously some of these things might not apply as much to today, but his message and what he did has changed the last 1,500 years, and it should influence the way that we live right now in the midst of being an Easter in the year 2020. Because, not unlike Benedict today, we find ourselves in a similar situation. Whereas Benedict chose to leave the world, chose to leave Rome and to retreat, we have been forced to, because of this pandemic, to be forced into our homes, into our own quote-unquote monasteries. And like Benedict, we have the same choice. We have the same freedom to, as John Paul II said, to live as we ought to live. Experiencing true freedom, not just choosing to do whatever we wish, but to live in the way that we ought to live. John Paul II, Saint Benedict, they both knew that in order to live the way that Christ has created us to live, we're called to this virtue of excellence, this virtue of, and this ability of giving the best of myself in my vocation and my daily responsibilities. And it is in doing this that we can live in true freedom. It is in doing this that we can live as we are created to, as sons and daughters of God the Father. But this excellence doesn't just happen haphazardly or by accident. It has to be chosen. And we have to be able to give ourselves by choice, to be able to give the best of ourselves. That's what Benedict of Nursia, Saint Benedict, knew. That's what the most recent Pope Benedict knew. We often think of the quote they said that, you were not made for comfort, you were made for greatness. And this is what he actually said. He said that the ways of the Lord are not easy, but we were not created for an easy life, but for great things, for goodness. Ultimately, when we choose this false freedom, when we choose just to do whatever we feel like at the moment, we will never move forward. In fact, we will never stay put where we are. We will always backslide into a deterioration of our own lives, just like Rome saw the deterioration of civilization and culture. When we choose this false freedom of, I'm just going to go off of a whim and experience life in the moment without choosing anything, we actually don't live in true freedom. And so excellence is a virtue by which we're able to do that. We're able to live ordered lives so that we can experience true freedom in the risen Jesus. But how do we do that? Just like Benedict had the order, this rule of Benedict, and just like you have been forced into your own monasteries and your homes and your dorm rooms and your houses and all that kind of stuff, you also have the choice of how you're going to live in your monastery. It can be easy to just let the days go by and let them happen to us. But ultimately, it will be a wildly unsatisfying life because it's not the way you're created to live. It's not the way Benedict's brothers were created to live 1,500 years ago. And it's not the way that Jesus created you to live. We have a choice in these restrictions that are actually, our ability to choose is actually heightened. Our ability to choose is actually heightened because everything has been kind of laid out on a blank canvas. My structure, my routine, my rhythm that I had while I was at campus is all of a sudden out the window. And now I have a clean slate. I can choose when and if I get out of bed. I can choose when and if I go to class. I can choose when and if I'm going to eat, what I'm going to eat, if I'm going to exercise, if I'm going to pray. With this newfound choice of freedom, we have to say, am I going to use that freedom to exercise it to choose what I ought, or am I just going to let life happen to me? Or am I going to order my life in such a way that is ordered towards the good and towards this excellence, or am I just going to let life happen according to my whims and my fleeting desires? I want to encourage you when you think of things like, am I going to class today? Am I going to make my bed today? Am I going to pray today? The answer to those things, if I'm not going to sit down and decide when I'm going to do those things, the answer to that is no. No, you're not going to make your bed. No, you're not going to go to class. No, you're not going to pray. No, you're not going to have meaningful conversation with your friends because you're not going to pick up the phone. Or you're not going to have real time with your family because y'all are just going to sit in front of a TV and watch Netflix. That would be life without choosing excellence, life without ordering. Now, what could life look like if you did order your life? If you sat down and looked at your week and said, this is what I need to do in my role as a son, as a daughter, as a son, as a brother, as a student, as a friend, as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend, whatever those things might be in your life. If I said, what is the most important thing this week that I need to do in order to live well in this role of my life? Then that is when we start living order. Then that's when we start living excellence. And that's when we start living in our identity as sons and daughters of God the Father. When we choose order, when we choose to live in this monastery in such a way, like St. Benedict did, to say, this is how I'm going to live my life so I can be open to God, we experience true and lasting freedom. And here's a final thought. You are not an animal. You actually are someone that was made above the rest of creation. Because on the final day, we see in Genesis that God created man in his image and likeness. It was a privilege that he gave only you and I. Only you and I can be co-creators with God. Only you and I can do what he did in bringing chaos to order and bringing nothing into something. He's been given us that privilege, and with that privilege, that responsibility to choose to be a co-creator. And it's not just going to be something that happens to us. So I'm going to live in such a way that I can bring order to my chaos so I can experience the freedom and the fullness of what Jesus wants me to live. Because ultimately, again, excellence is the ability to give of ourselves and our vocation and our daily responsibilities, but we cannot do that. We can never get the best of ourselves by accident. So in this time, I want to encourage you not to give of yourself in such a way that is just going to, quote unquote, happen as it comes, because it won't. And you and the people around you will not experience Jesus Christ. But if you choose to say, this is how I'm going to order my life, if you choose to live excellently, if you choose to live in such a way where I'm going to choose when I pray, when I make my bed, when I go to my class, when I study, when I talk to people and have meaningful conversations, then in those things, you will find Jesus. In those things, you will find a deeper relationship with him. And ultimately, he will help you to become the man or the woman that he is yearning to create you into. So let him do what he wants to do. But it's going to mean saying yes to him every day. Not just in the moment, but in your intentionality. Please know that we're praying for you, and know that Jesus has something great for you. He wants you to live greatly. So choose to do so.